So for today's podcast, the topic is mostly revolving around 9.2 things and uh, current events such as the Mage Tower, Legion Mythic Plus, that kind of stuff. And we're gonna go into some 9.2 stuff and then take some questions from you guys. So without further ado, I guess first topic at hand. How is everyone's Mage Towers going? You guys all get a chance to try it? Zara, did you clear all three yet? Or have you still
Yeah.
been living on PTR?
Both, but yeah, I've already done Subtlety, Outlaw, and Assassination. I haven't gotten to anything outside of those three, but yeah, got all three of those done, so they were fun. The Subtlety one was a really, really tight DPS check at the end. I was actually kind of surprised.
Nice, nice. Which one do you think was the hardest?
I would... Agatha was the most annoying. I wouldn't say it was the hardest. Assassination was hectic. I would say Assassination probably is the most going on, so I would say hardest would be that, but it also isn't hard once you kind of understand where the overlaps are coming. It comes down to memory a little bit, but I would say Assassination of the three is the hardest. Subtlety just comes down to, like, you just need to blast in the last phase. The first phase actually had to hold damage, so that way cooldowns are up for phase 2. So I would probably say Assassinations.
What about the other two lads in here?
So I walked into the Mage Tower, instantly killed Agatha, easiest boss of my life. Did it easily back then, back in the Legion days, did it easily now. I'm hard stuck on the Subtlety one though. That one, that's a tough one. Really struggle. And I haven't attempted the Assassination one because that spec sucks.
Wow.
Okay.
Overall, I think the Mage Tower is really cool though. I think it's nice that for the first time in basically WoW's history, other than the original Mage Towers, here's optional, mostly useless, hard single player content. You can't outgear it. The rewards are basically pointless. So if you can do it, good for you. If you can't, who cares? Don't bother with it. And it's one of the best content they've added into the game or added back. I think this is better than the original Mage Tower because I think the fact that you can't outgear it like the Legion one means that it will forever be difficult content that exists in the game. That no matter how much gear and crazy trinkets you get, it's always going to be something that you have to actually have a little bit of knowledge on game sense and spec knowledge to actually do proper damage.
I mean, there's...
Yeah, to be fair, there are some trinkets, right, that do scale in a weird way right now.
Oh yeah, obviously.
But I mean,
I just mean it's not going to be easier next tier in the next raid.
Yeah, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, assuming that the set bonus and everything, and all the goodies that we're gonna get in 9.2 will also be blocked, similar to the Covenant and Soulbinds and everything. But
the set bonus
I mean, for me, it was I've done all three now. I definitely agree with Guy there that the Outlaw one felt a little bit on the too easy side. Basically, I've watched other people on other specs play it, and they struggle a lot more with dealing with the imps. And then as Outlaw, it feels like you don't really notice them; they just die passively. And yeah, I mean, Assassination. It's hard for me to say how difficult the Assassination challenge ultimately is because, I mean, first of all, I've been playing the spec for such a long time. And then having a lot of leech gear, which I just always keep in my bank, helped a lot with just sustaining the damage. So maybe the challenge was a little bit on the easy side for me there as well. Subtlety definitely feels like the hardest for me personally. Mostly because dealing with 3 ads 4 times in the entire fight is just painful playing Subtlety, and you have to kill 3 ads, and it's not fun.
Yeah,
because I mean, it's definitely the weak point.
It's the ugliest target count ever.
Yeah,
it's so bad. I double storm of this, and it doesn't die, and I'm just oh.
Yeah, and then you're out of energy, and you're sitting there. And
and then you're
what are my choices now? While 2 of the ads are running into the puddles already.
Yeah, that challenge is brutal, but I suck. So
I just hit flurry, dude.
Yeah, I did. I wish.
Yeah, but I definitely agree with your point that like it's nice to have the single player challenge content. I mean, we had like similar attempts in the past with both the Proving Grounds and the Brawlers Guild, but it's I certainly agree that right now the Mage Tower is much more enjoyable and also challenging, simply because you can't just get like 3, 4, 5 more upgrades and then something that you struggled with initially just flops over on the first attempt you do with like all those upgrades. And I think that's definitely one of the issues that the Brawlers Guild in particular always had, even though like most of the encounters there are very fun as well.
I think
The Brawlers Guild is super fun.
I think the main thing that was kind of a misstep was I think that they should have made it use template characters instead of like scaling your stuff down, which I guess takes like an aspect out of it of like, oh, I'm gonna get this trinket from this content to try and cheese it. But I feel like it would have been like more fair all around, because I feel like a lot of the complaints are like, oh, I don't want to go farm, Mechagon rep, and I don't want to go get unbridled potions. So I don't know. It feels like a level playing field.
I think like probably templates would work better. Maybe I'm just misinformed on this because I'm not looking at every single spec's ability to do the Mage Tower with or without certain items. But I don't think it's the case that I want to say like 90% of specs just don't need these old like combinations of triple socketed gear, main stat gems, like wacko trinkets. I don't think most specs in the game have to actually bother doing that stuff. I know a lot of people in the Outlaw channel are really going after the healing trinket from Battle for Azeroth, where honorable kills give you, or like targets that can give experience will heal you. Like a lot of people were going after that, but you don't need it. You don't need Unbridled Fury. You don't need these things. Like obviously they make it easier, but I feel like if people just like tried to learn the challenge a little bit better rather than immediately running to the auction house or like a guide to figure out what items I can buy to make this not a challenge, I really don't think it's that bad.
Yeah, I mean, it certainly, I don't know. I wouldn't say it's like a cheat or anything, but it certainly feels a little weird when like I didn't do it like when I did the Sin challenge. I had a couple extra sockets and stuff in my Heart or Azeroth or whatever, but then people were like, oh look, Unbridled's doing 10% of my damage and Cyclo's also doing 10% of my damage, and I'm like, oh well,
yeah,
all right, that's cool, I guess.
I think it's impossible to have bought everything with just how many items there are in WoW.
Yeah, with like 17 years of history within the game, with like enchants and potions and other types of consumables that all work again, that currently are disabled on max level characters. There will always be something that someone missed, and I mean, with a community as big as it is right now in WoW, there will always be someone who will quickly figure out, okay, this still works. This makes the challenge like 5% easier, 10% easier. Personally, I don't even mind the idea of doing like legacy content to potentially get an upgrade from somewhere that can make that challenge easier. I think if you look at like the fact that this game is still supposed to be a role-playing game to a certain extent, it's nice to know, okay, if you do this, then you can have a slightly easier time within that content. But yeah, it's definitely a little bit disheartening to see when people are going out of their way and spending hundreds of thousands of gold just to kind of ignore the challenge that is set in front of them with the Mage Tower. Especially because I mean it's one of the few content types, or like content in general, that we've gotten over the last like half year, 9 months. So why rush to making it a 5 or 10 attempt challenge when you can have fun with it on multiple characters over the next, like, I mean, it's 4 weeks now, right? Or 3 are left. So
yeah,
there's still plenty of time to deal with all of them. And I mean, overcoming the challenge is, at least to me personally, way more fun than just getting around it.
Yeah, I tend to agree with
the same camp.
I also don't really have a problem with legacy gear being good in any way. Like I think that like farming for the auto ring from Court of Stars is technically like a fine addition as long as it's not too crazy. But the problem is that Legion time walking is going to go away, right? So ideally, I'd want to see something that's a little bit more permanent. Like if the Mage Tower was up the entire time and people could just go and like if they need to, they can go and farm Nithendra for their trinket for months or whatever. Then I feel like that'd be fine. But the fact that it's all gated and like it'll go away kind of makes the whole like legacy gear stuff really a sour taste.
Yeah, fear of missing out and whatnot.
Yeah. The fear of missing out, and if you're like, it's also around the holidays, so like if you're not around and you're busy and got work going on and stuff, and you can't play, then you can't farm 50 Court of Stars to try and get your ring, or you can't farm 50 Vault of the Wardens to try and get your trinket. You just feel like you're missing out just because you don't play as much.
We're just like moving into
not great.
Or just like moving like fully into just like time walking gear in general.
Yeah, just older gear, older consumables and stuff like that. Because Selly brought up a point about how older gear being allowed is kind of in the spirit of what an RPG should be.
It's like WoW has a really bad habit of every time we do something, we spend like a year and a half, 2 years in a certain thing, and then it's completely forfeit, which is normal with like when we had raid tier gear and stuff, and not even then, not always, because sometimes you'd be wearing 2 sets and 4 sets from the new sets or trying to mix and match and stuff. But WoW always has a really bad habit of just like getting rid of content or getting rid of things. So having the ability, like with those what are they called, relics of the past, that it's when you're crafting, you can actually craft things up to a higher item level so you can use them in different situations like this. I think that's interesting, but it also does kind of, as far as for the Mage Tower, would diminish the kind of the novelty of doing it without needing all that stuff. And with Mythic Plus time walking right now, especially the Legion Mythic Plus stuff, it's nice to actually be able to do other dungeons that you haven't done in a while to get upgrades, and not just to be able to do them just for the sake of doing them. Having something to actually look forward to rather than just, oh, I like this dungeon, I remember Court of Stars, it was fun. It's like, oh, I can actually get something meaningful out of it still, which is nice.
Yeah, especially when you look at other time walking events, right? Like, I mean, if there's a different time walking event, what did usually happen? People went into the dungeons 4 times to get their weekly quest done, and then for the most part, they either logged on an alt and did it again for another character, or they just never set foot into time walking for the rest of the week. And I mean, they're slowly adding onto that core idea that they had a while ago. First adding the time walking raids, and I think those were quite a big success. And now also adding the time walking Mythic Plus, which I think is a great idea personally, because obviously I'm a huge fan of Mythic Plus in general and Legion and Plus in particular. But it just feels nice to have rewards beyond the, okay, I haven't seen this dungeon ever. A lot of people who haven't played the game or only started in Legion or BFA might be doing like Cataclysm or Mists of Pandaria dungeons for the first time, and so there's some novelty there. But beyond that, there was never really a reason to do them repeatedly outside of maybe getting a time walking currency like mount or pet. So while there is certainly this fear of missing out when you can't participate in one of the time walking dungeons, having meaningful upgrades, or I would prefer side grades, I think is a good thing to have in the game, especially with how much gear centered around specific items just being acquired through raid, right? And that was something that we were also looking to towards for 9.2, where immediately the question was, okay, so how are people who aren't going into raid going to access the tier sets? And that was always an issue going back into like very early expansions. So I do think that there's a place for time walking gear to be as good or even maybe slightly better than current gear. It's just a matter of tuning it correctly, so it's not overbearing and you don't feel the burning need to just step into a dungeon like 100 times just to get that one trinket, because it's such an upgrade over every current trinket.
So related to the
you first, you go ahead.
Yeah. So like related to the Mage Tower stuff of like having old gear to farm, I think that's just like overall, I think that's fine. I think having, if you want to either learn the fights through playing them, reading guides, talking to people, That's a viable strategy if you want to beat it by farming old content to get an edge that way. I think that's also fine. I think it gives purpose to older content rather than just keeping all of this content completely useless forever. And then also, I think I'm a big fan of time walking gear actually being relevant. I think WoW currently needs more reasons to log into the game. Time walking does exactly that. We've been, my guild specifically, I guess, we've been on farm for a very long time. I haven't seen this many people log into the game since they've added Legion Mythic Plus. I see basically every single IG wearer permanently in both of the wardens, permanently playing the game, permanently asking in guild, hey, come do keys. We're going to be doing vault spams. We're going to be doing like vault core spams. We need like people to just run around with. I like parsing, so I like doing big damage. So when stuff like time walking gives gear, gives me a reason to log on, do my rotation, run around, play the game, have fun. Sure, it might be weird that a 246 trinket from time walking is better than a 252 mythic trinket, but who cares? In my opinion, I'd rather have more excuses to play the game than less, and making those trinkets worse than mythic options would basically shut off an entire subsection of the population that plays WoW at a mythic level from engaging with the content at all in a gear upgrade aspect. Obviously, the Legion time walking is a lot more weighted in power because it has access to Mythic Plus, so it has access to really, really high eye level versions of these like special items. What I would like to see moving forward, maybe, if people are generally a fan of this idea of Legion time walking actually being a way to get damage, is add a way to get Wrath trinkets, Kata trinkets, just like whatever the dungeons are. Maybe once you complete 10 dungeons or whatever, you get some kind of trinket upgrader, and then the trinket will go to 246 or whatever the mythic 15 version of the trinket is, just so that there's more options. Like, hey, I can farm on Cataclysm week, I can get this trinket, on the Wrath week, there's something like Deathbringer's Will or something. Just reasons to log into WoW is what I want, and stuff like Legion time walking actually dropping gear that's useful is something that does that.
Yeah. I think that I would want to see some sort of time walking gear, like especially trinkets. I think trinkets can be really, really cool when they're done correctly. But a lot of the time, it's always sort of a question of, oh, well, this just does damage, or this just gives me stats. And so I feel like there's not really much thought behind taking which trinket in which situation. You kind of have that with like Mythic Plus versus Raid. Like you would take Fusion Amplifier and Raid, and then you'd maybe swap into like an Ocular Gland for Mythic Plus or something like that. But outside of that, where you're just getting like raw stats, or you're like, this trinket does AoE, it doesn't feel that interesting to me. So I think like Whetstone was a kind of a breath of fresh air, because we're kind of lacking on just raw AoE trinkets this expansion. Like in Legion, we had Moonglaves and stuff, and Moonglaves were just crazy, right? But now if you go into Mythic Plus, a lot of rogues especially are just wearing like Fusion Amplifier, and part of that is like prio damage or whatever. But there's also just an inherent lack of AoE options. So I think in my ideal world, I'd want to see something like Whetstone, where it's like, this is really good, but only on, really heavy AoE. And then you'd get, some sort of Kata trinket, and it's like, well, this is really good, but only on like 2 to 4 targets, and it doesn't really do anything past that. So I feel like that was like also one of those things where they target capped the trinkets now. I feel like that was a sort of a missed opportunity to try and give trinkets a niche. Because I'm that guy that sits there when a ready check goes out in front of a raid fight, or looking at a Mythic Plus route and going, okay, well, what can I do? What can I change to squeeze out some more damage? Right? And I feel like a lot of people play the same way, but right now there's not really much you can do in that regard. You kind of just look at your trinkets and you go, well, I want to play something that does cleave, but I can't because that trinket doesn't exist. That there's no trinket in that space that I can use, that I can think about using here, because there's just nothing.
Yeah, there's not a whole lot of gear pieces in general, right? That do have that opportunity right now. Looking back, and I think Legion is the prime example as an expansion there, with gear swaps being around, obviously. For dungeons themselves, they always played a big role. And I mean, we had the legendaries, we had the set bonuses, and we had the trinkets, and all of them allowed a class to function in an environment where the core class design just failed to provide a meaningful niche. But I mean, if you needed AoE desperately in your entire raid or in your entire group, then you just swapped something in that allowed you to at least be somewhat competitive. You would never beat the classes that were designed to excel in that kind of environment, right? But you would be able to contribute. And right now, I mean, I don't feel like the Shadowlands legendaries really fill the same niche that the Legion legendaries did. They're just not like powerful enough to really help with those issues. And as you just like explained perfectly, trinkets really don't do it either anymore. Like most of the trinkets are just passive damage increases, usually on pure single target. There's no cleave trinket, there's no AoE trinket, and the few that we have that at least mechanically should work in those situations, just based on design flaws, do not. When we're looking at something like the Decanter from Sanguine Depths as a trinket that is supposedly more AoE oriented, but then it just has a lot of issues that just make it pretty much unplayable in those environments.
Yeah, or there's trinkets like Shadow Grasp Totem, which like you see some niche use from it, pulling stuff through the mists in mists, but it has this entire line where it reduces the cooldown if it like kills its target or whatever. And even though it has that, I personally never really notice it, / I don't really care for it. I just send it on cooldown anyways.
Yep.
And so there's no if you took out that extra line that it reduces the cooldown, it would be the same exact trinket. There'd be no change. So
yeah, it's the same with the crit trinket, right? From Raid Soul Render trinket.
Yeah.
It has a heal effect. I don't think most people even know that. You don't really notice it when you play it. I think at the end of the day, it's like 0.1% of your healing or something on an encounter, maybe even on a plus in a bursting week. It's just not noticeable. I think a lot of people were putting big stakes into that trinket, particularly for Mage Tower, to get some extra healing on the challenges that were a little bit high on the damage intake, but quickly realized that, I mean, that effect may as well not.
It's also nerfed in Mage Tower, I think, but
yeah,
I don't know. There's a lot of space from like bring back old trinkets in the form of Timewalking, and I feel like that's just an opportunity to try and create some diversity between when you're picking one trinket over the other. That isn't really clear cut. It's just, Sim's higher than this one, so we take this one. But yeah.
Yeah, I said something similar in BFA. There just lacks cool trinkets. Like right now, the best trinkets in the game are Salvage Fusion Amplifier, which is press button, do big damage over X seconds. The second best trinket is File of Putrefaction, which is just a passive dot that gets applied to the target. Long gone are the days of Convergence of Fate or
anything
Argus
interesting.
Pantheon trinkets or
Draught of Souls, yeah.
Yeah, Draught of Souls. Like Coral was pretty cool. Coral was sick. Writhing Mass when it was bugged, that was sick. But most of the trinkets are kind of just. I mean, most of them in BFA were pretty meh as well. So I'm hoping there's definitely a lot of like cool design space you can make with trinkets in carving out specific niches on target counts and actually having just doing more interesting stuff than just do damage, give stats.
I mean, even Eye of Command, right? Like even Eye of Command from Legion, even though it just gave stats, it gave so much, but it had a downside to it a little bit, right? Because you could only hit that one target. So you know that if you have a fight where you're changing targets constantly, wouldn't take Eye of Command, even though it's really, really strong. You don't have that with like Fusion Amplifier, because with Fusion Amplifier, you're just like, well, I press the button, and if I swap targets, I swap targets. Cool. Still does the same damage. I'm not losing anything.
That's why Coral was the best trinket in the game.
Yeah, the sad part about this, like, I'm just gonna call it somewhat dull design, even though it's not entirely accurate. But it also leads to this issue where every tier it basically comes down to, okay, are my best trinkets gonna come from dungeons this tier, or are they gonna come from raid? And then there's no alternative to that, right? Like if the trinkets are well tuned for single target, like it was this tier, then I mean, okay, maybe if you get lucky and you get a file, you get to play it. But for the most part, you just want the raid trinkets. And then we had raid tiers, especially in BFA, where it was entirely hit and miss whether you wanted to play two trinkets from raid or one trinket from raid. But it was always very clear cut. There was no alternative to these trinkets. They were just vastly superior to any other alternative. And I mean, either you had it or you didn't. And if you didn't, then you just felt bad about every other trinket that was offered to you that you got dropped or that you got in your weekly chest.
I think the overall trinket balance is like, again, most of my content to be talking about Outlaw. I don't know the trials and tribulations of other specs, but like there's like 10 good trinkets for Outlaw. While I was writing the Mage Tower guide, it was just I was like, just put on any trinket that you're using, because like it's gonna be good, because like you have like amplifier, the KT trinket, you have file, there's codex, there's actually like a million trinkets. Like basically all of them are serviceable, at least for Outlaw.
Yeah, like Grim Codex, actually, I did try that for a bit for Agatha, and it actually does work out pretty decently when you have the big waves at imps. So there was just, I mean, you can just cleave off one thing and it hits all things behind it. It's actually better than you would think, because it used to, I don't know if it was just like a Simcraft tuning or tweaking that was done, but for a while, Grim Codex, I remember not simming all that great. And now it's like, it shows up and it's actually not, if I had a 252, I'd probably consider wearing it for Mythic Plus.
Yeah, the trinket owns. People sleep on it. People sleep on a lot of random trinkets. People just see the two trinkets that everybody uses, which is like salvaged and file, and every other trinket unusable, garbage, trash, instant disenchant. I will use a green salvage, or I'll use a green salvage fusion amplifier before I even touch another trinket. But
that's community perception for you.
You know,
what does top 100 Warcraft log say? I do that.
Not even top 100, just top 1. I only look at the top players.
I mean, it's clan and amplifier, isn't it, for the most part?
If I have to scroll, it's not worth my time.
Exactly.
So I guess on that note of old trinkets, we saw that Whetstone is Omega nerfed now. It does 50% more base damage. However, it now splits its damage between all targets, and it does increasing damage per target up to 5. Just like a normal AoE trinket, that increase in damage is 15% per target. So it's basically a gain on one target and then an instant loss on everything else. And in AoE, it'll do, half the damage. And in bigger pulls, it'll obviously do even less than that. So seeing that, do you think that countermeasures will also see the nerf put into the ground?
I'm not sure. The reason I think why Whetstone was such a massive outlier was because of what you explained a few minutes ago. It's just there was no other trinket that was even close to the usefulness of the Whetstone. Whereas countermeasures is basically just a differently typed fusion amplifier for the most part. Maybe it deals a little bit more damage, maybe it deals a little bit less, but the functionality of the trinket itself is almost the same. So hopefully it can remain as a side grade for all those people who are not yet killing Mythic Guardian or just happen to get unlucky. I mean, I know for me it took 15 weeks of killing the boss before I finally got one. And having dungeon alternatives for these kind of trinkets is pretty healthy for the game, I would say. So, even if you got a little bit unlucky in raid, especially with like no bad luck protection, no master looter, no bonus rolls. Having an opportunity to just no life a dungeon for a couple of days to get an equally as good item. I think that's a healthy thing for the game. So hopefully they're not going to nerf it into the ground.
I can't imagine them doing a blue post on how they're changing a handful of trinkets and then another blue post later with another handful of trinket changes. My assumption is if they're going to change any of the trinkets, it would be in the first blue post. Anything else, my guess is probably no changes. Because why would you make half a balance change and then do half a balance change later? Seems to make more sense just to have them all at once. Maybe delay it a few days and then be like, hey, we're going to nerf Whetstone and we're nerfing Countermeasure and we're doing this, blah, 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 rather than doing like half and half. It just seems like dumb to do half and half.
How much better is it even for all the specs?
Like I think it's like 50 DPS or something for me.
Over 252 fusion amp.
Yeah.
It's somewhere in that range. I saw that on Sin because of the crit and the interaction with the frost set with crit, like 150. But I did some sims for 9.2, and I compared it to that over a 252 fusion amp without stuff on, and it was less. It was like 70 or whatever.
So it's mostly, it's not even the proc itself, so it's just the fact that it has crit instead of agility that makes it.
It's still really good as a proc. It's not like the damage is bad and it's just pure stats, but the stats definitely help.
Yeah.
There's also something to consider is like we look at it a little bit in a vacuum for trinkets, especially things that can be used by a lot of different classes since it is just a secondary stat trinket. If this trinket, I don't really look at any other classes or specs, but if this trinket is only good for rogues and it's only like 100 DPS better than another trinket that's relatively close in item level, I don't see them touching it. Like if this was like the best melee DPS trinket, period, bar none for everybody, maybe. But if it's literally just us, I would maybe dual wield specs.
It's always rogue plus demon hunter, literally every time.
Yeah. There's also the point to be made that they also, it's not just their nerfs, right? I mean, obviously Whetstone got nerfed, but clearly they looked at all trinkets and not just 500 positive outliers, with the mark of dark roll being buffed by like 500%. So I was actually going to agree with what Guy said. They did seem to have taken a look at all the trinkets and not just the ones that we have been hunting for the last 6 or 7 days. So I think it's fairly safe to say that at least for the time being, countermeasure is probably here to stay. But I mean, obviously they can always change their mind on this later on. But I think for now, I would guess farming it is probably worth it because, as Guy just stated, it's unlikely for them to just come out in a few days and say, "Oh yeah, by the way, we totally forgot we're going to nerf countermeasures by 80%."
How many vault runs have you done, Sally?
Not that many, actually. I haven't really been farming dungeons for gear per se. I've mostly been trying to push the keys to the highest level. Because usually when you run with a group of people you know, then you can just say, "Oh, hey, by the way, can you go Enhancement Shaman and Windwalker on the tank and healer?" And I mean, higher keys having more loot per run at least allowed me to get both Court of Stars items so far. But I haven't done a whole lot of Vault, and I mean, I have pretty much every trinket from Legion Timewalking at this point, except for countermeasures.
Nice. When you're pushing, because I've been basically farming Court of Stars, but I haven't done anything over, I think, a 17. How impactful is that debuff from Infernal? Because when you kill the Infernals and you soak the thing, it does a pulsing debuff that increases their damage done, right? Is that an actual like big increase? Is that like prideful levels of damage where you get it and then
None.
blast?
Definitely not prideful level. I think the main hindrance for the debuff itself is just that for the most part, the Legion dungeons aren't really about like getting more time by just doing more DPS. It's just about living things. once you push high enough. And so the debuff does nothing for that. And while I think there's still a lot of room for improvement for most of the groups to really utilize the buff in a better way. Say, for example, you can usually stack up the debuff without pulling the boss by just standing close to it. And right now, everything like all the people do is they pull the last set of Infernals with the boss, and then they get like 3 stacks or like 3 sets of stacks from the Infernals. But technically, you can already start with the first set of Infernals and get like 9 full Infernal stacks on it, which would be roughly like 40 to 50% increased damage taken once you start to actually pull the boss. And that would definitely be a huge gain and just making the bosses easier. But at the end of the day, I think the Affix itself is just a little bit of a time waster, which doesn't really matter that much for Legion Dungeons because the timer is not an issue. It's just about surviving the actual bosses and the actual trash mechanics. And the Affix does nothing to help with that.
Yeah, I think I did the Affix twice, and then we went to +2s. So that's my experience with the mechanic.
Yeah, I mean, we had the great push over the weekend, right? And it did not seem like any of the teams were actively playing around it beyond, getting the last 3 with the boss and trying to extend the buff instead of getting all three applications at the same time. But yeah, it's just not a big. It's not big enough of an affix or not a meaningful enough of an affix. Maybe if they increase it from 1% increased damage taken per stack to 2, it would feel more noticeable, if that makes sense.
It also lasts a really short time, I think. I think
like 20
seconds.
Like
20 seconds. Yeah.
Yeah, like I was talking to some of the people playing Great Push about potentially like if they had any plans of optimizing the debuff uptime a little bit better. And at the end of the day, when you're pushing into like 25, 26, 27, you don't even have enough time to kill the next wave of Infernals before the debuff from the first set of Infernals already ran out.
Yeah.
So even if you try to min-max a lot there, you can't really play around it due to the way that the numbers are tuned right now. I still like the affix in itself because, something that we've seen in Shadowlands and Plus in general, not just in Timewalking, is this kiss/curse affix design, where you first have to deal with an affix that just costs you time and that you have to expend cooldowns on. But once you've dealt with it, you also get a benefit from it. And Infernal obviously falls into that category. While the tuning itself might be off, I do think that them experimenting with more of these kind of affixes is a nice thing. And I mean, we've already had like some minor, I don't want to call them leaks, but at least we have a basic idea now of what seasonal affix is waiting for us in 9.2. Yeah, it's called encrypted, and apparently like it's again something like a kiss/curse seasonal affix. And I do really like those because I think it's an interesting design choice to have players figure out, okay, what's the best way to approach these mechanics and how can we best fit these into our routes in order to really maximize the benefit of what we're doing here. And honestly, I hope that this kind of design philosophy eventually finds its way into raid design as well. There's not that many raid mechanics that do this thing where you deal with a certain mechanic and then at least for a short period of time you get a massive like boon or boost to your raid's performance. It rarely works that way.
My only problem with the kiss curse things, I do think design wise, I think it's a good thing because it allows for some great creativity with it. The problem is, and as I'm sure you've seen with higher keys or just when pushing keys, is there are times where you basically just have to ignore the affix to some degree. Like I think Tormented's a bit different because at least there's a debuff applied to just the last boss when you skip things, but it's a pretty common strategy even in like lower quote unquote like 23s, 22s, where you'll skip certain tormented enemies just so that way you can save time because the buffs that they offer are worth less than dealing with the debuff that they apply. Which I feel that's kind of, I mean, it's better than Prideful because Prideful people were literally just like shroud skipping or like death skipping and doing weird stuff to just completely ignore it because it was that bad of an affix at points when it was so much time and cooldowns invested that you just literally didn't gain anything out of it. You blew everything just to get a minute buff when you had no cooldowns up, and Tormented's better than that. I'm hoping we don't I'm hoping we see the lessons learned from both Tormented and Prideful, the good and bad of both, and that's used going forward with Encrypted. As I think it has, if they can do it right, it could be as enjoyable or more enjoyable than Tormented, personally.
What do you mean by the downsides of Tormented?
Well, they have ads that their buffs are so inconsequential that it's more often than not, especially with Affixes combinations, that you just skip them anyhow. I guess is how I'd word it. Like,
yeah, I mean, you have 2 offensive ones, right, and 2 defensive ones, and then
so
you're skipping the defensive ones as much as you can, and as much as your tank or your group can survive on the last boss.
Exactly. You're not going to skip, like, you won't skip Varuth or Arkalath, but very likely, unless it's something like Nalthor, you won't, or Sagadon, you won't skip on Necrotic Wake because Nalthor will just chunk your tank in like 2 hits with that Icicle Lance, which is physical, even though it's a frost attack or whatever. But there's just certain dungeons where you just don't even deal with certain enemies from the Tormented Affix, which kind of, and it's, if you're going to skip things like Seliathan just said, you're going to skip the defensive ones, you're never going to skip offensive ones. So they should all have had an offensive, like they should all have had Champions Brand as an option, for example. So that way you could say, oh, okay, it's either I can take a defensive or I can get some more stats or something, you know?
So I think I just disagree. I think it reminds me of what I liked about Awakening, where when you do Awakening in just like your weekly 15s, you're going to every pillar, you're using all the portals, you're doing some crazy routes. Usually you're not really skipping in lower keys, but when you get to higher and higher keys, you have to change your routes a lot around. You have to, use portals in certain ways. And then eventually you just don't even need certain pillars. You can just bring the pillars into the boss. And I think being able to ignore the seasonal Mythic Plus mechanic is a very, I think the Prideful ignoring it is bad, because that was just, go Night Elf and Shadow Meld, and that's like that was the worst. That was like the worst. That's like cheating. Yeah. That's like cheating. But when they give you the option to either engage in combat with this hard mob and it'll give you a benefit, if you don't think the benefit's worth it, I think that's interesting that you can put a downside to fighting the last boss and having to play with like a additional negative modifier because of the choices that you made in the dungeon. I think it just opens up more like interesting design space in regards to like how you can choose to pull a dungeon and how you can route.
That's fair. I think that it's a option. The fact that it's an option and that there is a downside to it, whereas like we just mentioned, Prideful was just like the worst example of a Kiss curse, because it just literally it just meant memeing it, and you just didn't even deal with it at all because it was so bad that the buff was pointless. Tormented definitely fixes a lot of those issues. I'm hoping that Encrypted follows at least some of that design philosophy, and it'll make it hopefully more worthwhile that it usually would be better to do it. It of course depends on the key level, like when you start getting into just absurdly high keys. But I don't know. I'm optimistic, I would say.
It's kind of what I envisioned, what I was coping on how I wanted Beguiling to function in EP, where when I saw Beguiling, a lot of people were like, ooh, this sucks. And I'm like, like, are some of these packs going to be unbearable? Absolutely. But like my dream for Beguiling was like, here's an affix where, oh, like this pack has this monster on it. We just don't do this pack this week. Let's route in a different way to not pull this ugly monster. Obviously, it's not really how it played out. People just did it begrudgingly, or just totally skipped certain.
One of the interesting facts about Beguiling, though, and I'm actually glad you brought it up, is that I think the very first time it was that data mined on the PTR, it actually had a Kiss Curse mechanic attached to it.
Yep.
And then they actually got rid of that. And I think that was a lot of wasted potential. I would say that the main issue with Beguiling was the rotational thing about it, and it's something that I've always been objecting to when it comes to Mythic Plus in general. It's just the seasonal affix. When we look at when Blizzard first talked about it back in BFA beta, they moved the Tyrannical and the Fortified affixes from the +10 key level to, I think it's +4 now, or +3. And said that the seasonal affix is not supposed to be a high impact affix. So there's not such a major jump in difficulty going from +9 to +10 like it was with Fortified and Tyrannical. And except for reaping, I would say that has never been true. So maybe either they changed their view on this. But overall, I just feel that the rotational aspect is just kind of bad because you do want people to get some consistency, especially with Affix changing every week already. And I do agree with you, Guy, when you said that ultimately it opens up a lot of design space, but it comes down to the tuning of it. When you have something like Pride, where you basically try to invest potion every single one of them, that's bad.
Yeah,
If you have something like Tormented, where some of them you literally cannot skip, either for the DPS benefit or simply because their auras are just too painful to deal with. Like I don't even want to imagine what a final boss is like with 50% reduced healing or the constant ticking debuff that takes off like 20-30% of people's health every couple of seconds.
Yeah, like obviously the movement speed one is the least detrimental one, and the buff happens to also be the least impactful. I prefer if they kind of like, more even them out, where like maybe if you skip the damage one, like the debuff, like I wish the debuffs were a little bit more paired to like the power of the actual guardian,
like the easiest to deal with negative effect should also bring the biggest power, so there's some actual decision making involved there.
I do still think it's interesting. I'll stand by it. I think skipping them to fight bosses even harder, I think that's cool.
Having the choice to do it is a good idea.
Yeah, the choice. Yeah. Prideful obviously sucked because the way you chose not to engage with Prideful was like cheating. You would go Night Elf and like vanish, or you would like use.
Yeah, and then they fixed it, and then you just needed to hold Invis Potion the entire dungeon because you could never ever use a DPS potion for anything unless you really knew, okay, we're not gonna find a Prideful in the next 5 minutes, or we're gonna skip it in some other weird way.
I'm also glad we've moved away from percent-based affixes, because those are probably my least favorite thing about Mythic Plus, because it just makes it where, oh, you accidentally pulled one thing wrong in your route, now you're going to get this thing to spawn at the exact worst possible time. I'm very thankful that we moved away from that. Well, especially that, yes.
Yeah, first time tank doesn't know when reaping spawns, man. You're like fighting a boss, he pulls one monster, spawns reaping, you just explode.
Yeah, I think one of the main issues that I personally always had with the percentage-based Mythic Plus affixes is that it basically requires the tank or even the entire group to use external add-ons. I think the game itself doesn't really give a lot of information as to how much mob count you're getting from each individual pull, and needing third-party tools to help with that is not good. I mean, obviously, with MDT being a thing and being able to pre-plan your routes into the smallest detail is amazing when you're looking at it from a very competitive angle. But having it basically become a requirement for any level of competitiveness, from the most casual players to the people who really push the rank 1 keys in the world, I think there should be it should be introduced at a higher level, or should be a requirement at a higher level, but it should not be something that when you step foot into your first +5 key, and it's literally the first time you play on plus and you get kicked again because you don't have MDT and don't know what is being pulled. I don't think that is good, and I think that's one of the main reasons why I never really liked the percentage-based affixes, because it just excludes an entire group of the player base based on not having a third-party tool to help them plan the dungeon.
Do you agree though that his curse mechanics should have that layer of like, if you don't want to pull this, then don't pull it, but you're gonna get punished. So I'm with Guy that it's like just having it up as an option even is just so good. And I feel like some of them are just crazy overtuned, but because the strat is just kill them all, like talking broader community here, the strat is always to just kill all the tormentors anyways. I feel like that sort of style of play where like you would skip one or two of them gets kind of overshadowed. Like we were doing a 23 theater yesterday, and the healer was like, yeah, if we skip this, then it would be doing 7,000 ticking damage every 3 seconds to all players on the last boss. which, you know, for one healer is just an absolutely absurd amount.
Yeah.
But
There's no choice involved there, right? Like you do it.
It's
It's a very
just
binary
unplayable,
thing.
right?
Either you kill him or you wipe. There's no decision making process involved there at all.
Yeah, so I'm
I would
interested.
still like. Sorry, go ahead.
So I'm interested to see how encrypted kind of handles that. If you just have to play them all, because they're just strong, or if you're actually able to go, okay, well, we only need, you know, let's say 4 buffs out of the 7 that are available, and the other 3 are just in places where we don't want to go. So we'll just skip those. And if there's a downside to that, cool. But I'm just interested to see in how that actually ends up becoming a thing.
Yeah, it does seem like a little bit more like infested though, as in that like individual trash mobs in the dungeon will be empowered, and once you engage with them, they will like bring forth this automaton or whatever it's called. So maybe it's not like the current Affix, but we'll have to engage with specific trash packs or avoid specific trash packs. Something that Guy was talking about earlier, where a trash pack you would normally consider as easy mob count, you're now considering just like skipping it entirely in order to not have to engage with this mechanic, because the upside maybe isn't worth for the upcoming pull. But yeah, I'm certainly hyped to see how exactly it plays out in the PTR once it's there. And yeah, maybe there will be more boss encounters like that as well.
That's actually a decent segue to PTR. We've seen a lot of PTR stuff now with tier bonuses. We've seen some raid testing, and I guess we could stay on the Mythic Plus route just a little bit longer, because as we know in 9.1, the domination sets weren't active Mythic Plus. They were only active in raid. So Mythic Plus didn't really see much change in terms of actual borrowed power outside of the Affix. Do you guys think that some of the tier bonuses we've seen, especially rogue-based, obviously, will have any sort of impact on Mythic Plus? I think the first impression is sub-tier set in Mythic Plus is huge because it makes cleave better, but then assassination, for example, is only single target. Now, obviously, with the change to the Shiv crit, we're seeing that shift out a little bit. But do you think that it changes the position that Rogue is in and how that plays in Mythic Plus?
I don't think so. I think if Rogue does big damage, it'll probably be brought to dungeons, right?
I think, I mean, subtlety is just the subtlety. They've already mentioned. I mean, I can post the link for the changes they're making in context, but there's also numerous bugs that they've said that more or less, like the TLDR, is there's a lot of synergistic things that aren't working with the subtlety tier set right now that we kind of speculated a while ago. Like it's supposed to work with Akaris, the 4 set's supposed to proc the 2 set, I believe. The fact that Symbols of Death is making the 4 set critically hit if it procs with Symbols of Death isn't supposed to happen. There's a lot of things going on with it, but I think the set is definitely going to make subtlety even stronger than it already is in that case, which is great. And it'll also shore up its one weakness of low target situations, because you'll be able to get all those shadow strikes onto lower target like 5 or less targets, and that lovely 2 to 3 target cleave section that subtlety is so well known for, you know?
Banging 3 target cleave.
Yep. That 2 targets, man, I love that. Just that extra rupture on the one guy. It's beautiful. A lovely
single target rotation on 2 targets. Huge.
It depends on what role Rogue is supposed to play in Mythic Plus specifically. I mean, right now we're mostly there for the single target and the priority target damage. So having bonuses that allow us to cleave a little bit better or AoE a little bit better will probably not affect our viability in that content a whole lot. At the end of the day, I think it's too early to tell, simply because we don't really know what other classes are getting. So even if our bonuses look nice and feel nice and play nice, if other classes just get better stuff, then I mean we might be left behind a little bit.
Especially with double legendaries, right?
Yeah, there's a lot of gears that are being turned, and I mean at the end of the day, the set bonus is only one of them. But it's certainly nice that they've been, or that Blizzard has been aware that Assassination might struggle a little bit with the AoE cleave, and so their adjustment to the 2-piece bonus is already promoting an idea of having like an extra button to press on AoE, not rotationally or regularly, but just as a cooldown. I think that's something that Rogue historically has always been a little bit weak on. It's just not really having like big AoE buttons to press that really feel meaningful when you press them. I mean, whether it's the Shuriken Storm or the Black Powder or the Black Blade Rush or the Crimson Tempest, none of them really feel like, okay, if you press this button, there's going to be big damage coming in. So, yeah, having or bringing those buttons back a little bit, whether we had the DFA and Legion, and now we have the shift for Assassination, maybe in AoE. I think that's a good start, and hopefully the development continues in that direction, where the bonuses aren't just dropping from raid and designed for raid encounters, but also have like meaningful utility or viability in other types of content, whether it's Mythic Plus or PvP.
Yeah, just making them universally good rather than just single target good or just AoE good.
I'm pretty sure the PvP players are very excited about the Assassination set so far, because that is looking to be very, very strong.
Seems like a good amount of burst.
Yeah.
The other thing about PTR, obviously, we had some raid testing, and even though we didn't have double legendaries up, we did get to play with the set bonuses. So I just kind of want to go down the line. If you did any testing, what you felt like, what specs you played, what sets you enjoyed, what you did. So we'll just go top to bottom. Mr. Zeratule, did you do any raid testing?
I did the first round, so I've only done 2 bosses of the raid. I was tied up the second day they were doing the heroic raid testing. I'm actually pulling up the dungeon journal now because I still don't remember their names yet. I know one's the worm from Dune, the worm from Dune, basically. Let me see, which ones was mine? I don't even know how you say that. Dacine, the Fallen Oracle, and Skolex, the Insatiable Ravener. They were both really interesting. I did them in pugs, so it was very much a chaotic mess, and people wouldn't listen to basic mechanics like on the worm having to stand as a group to remove the debuff. I think that there is so far of just the 2 fights I did, there is a exceptional amount of mobility needed. But that is not necessarily a bad thing, because with all 3 specs having good levels of movement between Shadow Step, Grappling Hook, and Sprint, I don't think we'll be punished as much as other melee specs, which is obviously a good thing in our favor. Tuning-wise, obviously it's a bit too early to say. None of them felt unreasonable. People just weren't doing mechanics correctly, like avoiding the black shadow waves that we're going through on Dacine that come from each of the pylons. It's like basically, for people who haven't seen it, it's basically a big platform with 4 pylons, 1 on each corner of the room, and the boss will start like channeling on them, and it will cause these waves to come out, which is one part. And then there's a DPS shield you have to burn down during one part, very similar to Lady Ashvane from Eternal Palace. And then Skolex was a very unique fight, definitely one I haven't seen anything quite like it before. But the fact that there's a mechanic where the entire raid has to stand together to cause the boss to do a special ability to remove your stacks of a constantly ticking debuff in a pug is, when they don't listen, is very much painful. I'm sure in a coordinated group it won't be that hard of a fight, but it'll definitely be an annoying pug fight from what I'm seeing so far. But those are the only 2 I can really speak of.
And Mr. Selly, how was your raid testing?
I have not done any PTR raid test whatsoever, so I'll have to sit this one out.
Did you at least play with the set on like a dummy or something?
I mean, I went in to see exactly what the implementation of the assassination 4-piece would be, because I mean, while we had some information on that, or assumed the way it worked based on the wording, getting confirmation on the mechanics behind the set bonus was certainly nice. But the way I look at the PTR for the most part is that things are changing all the time, especially because now Blizzard is really like looking towards incorporating community feedback. So I hope that everyone is really like trying stuff out, and I certainly should do so myself a little bit more as well, and providing feedback so we can get the best bonuses imaginable. But yeah, beyond that, I didn't really like try it out per se. I'm mostly waiting for Mythic Plus to be accessible with the new affix, because I mean, smarter people than me will figure stuff out for raid, and then I'll deep dive again on the Mythic Plus stuff, because that's still the one thing in WoW that I really enjoy by far the most.
M plus Andy.
Yep.
And then, Guy, you did some testing, right? I think you did all 4?
I did. We do a little testing. So I didn't do the first one because they were like on Thursday, like, hey, we're doing raid testing Friday. I'm like, nope, I gotta be a wage slave, so I didn't do the first set. The second set, I was playing Hearthstone and I forgot there was raid testing, so I only did Zymox for 30 minutes rather than the full hour. Zymox is sick. The original Zymox is one of my favorite fights ever, so this fight super owns. I love it. It's fun. You go through portals again. There's new mechanics. There's like mobs that spawn. I love when monsters spawn. It's great. So Blunderbuss plus the Outlaw 2 set, not real. That is the worst. That is the worst spec playstyle in the entire game. If anybody has an Outlaw rogue, go make Blunderbuss and go try to play the 2-piece. It is unbearable. You have way too many combo points. You can't like it just doesn't work. It doesn't work. You get way too many combo points. You're overcapping 500 combo points every fight, and then you're in permanent lag, so you never get to actually spend your combo points properly. Overall L. Celerity is all right. It's a little bit more reasonable. You get not a million combo points from Blunderbuss giving you a million, so it feels a lot better. Hopefully I know they're nerfing. I know they're nerfing the 2 set to make it give you less combo points, so maybe Blunderbuss might be a little bit more bearable, including when they fix the bugs. But not a fan of the Blunderbuss stuff.
Do you think that lag plays a big role in the gameplay feel there, or do you think that it's just like fundamentally an issue with the 2-piece consuming the buff, while you didn't really get to stack up all the modifiers you would initially would have liked for the proc itself?
The issue is just you need to react for Outlaw, and you usually plan like 2 or 3 globals ahead, and it's impossible when you're getting mastery procs mid-global, and then it goes from like you go to press Sinister Strike, and then you gain 6 combo points, so then that Sinister Strike overcaps, and then you get like another like 10 from somewhere else. Like it just doesn't work. You get too many. It's impossible to play around properly. With at least with how frequent the 2 set is proccing. And then I don't really understand what the other boss was doing. Mr. Lihuvim? I don't know. He was kind of cool. I liked him. He seemed fun. It was kind of like fetid. They kind of had like a fetid vibe going on with like the little things you have to like burst down. You're probably gonna organize like 2 and 2. We were thinking about like a 3 tank strat for that, where you would just tank that guy who makes the giant bubble just away from the boss, and you could just fully ignore him. That felt kind of decent. But overall, I like the boss. Lots of movement, dude. Every fight is just you're just running around.
That's what I noticed too.
You need so much mobility on that fight.
An anti-ranged tier. What a shame.
So you're saying Night Fae and Soul Shape, or
Subtlety, double shadow step, Selly, you can't place in.
Blade Rush perfectly lines up for every knockback. If you're doing the rotation properly, it comes up right when the knockback happens. Infinite mobility.
Nice.
As Guy smashes his fist through the Earth's core.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What about you, Whispyr? In terms of raid testing, did you get a chance to try out everything that you wanted to?
Yeah, so I didn't get a group for the first set of bosses, but I did end up going with a couple guildies, and a pug group for the second two. Zymox, I actually have to disagree. Zymox is a dog shit fight.
What? Wait, why?
I felt like nothing was happening.
Dude.
Like,
well, that's true.
Like there was rings, and you just fucking ran through the portals, and it was all good. Like that's all you did.
Let me say, I like the teleporters. Okay, the teleporters owned. Okay, the ads that just did like I don't know what that damage was from those ads that just like fire like a cone. That was silly stuff. I don't like that. I don't like the boss goes immune, but I just like the portal mechanic. Okay.
So you just like portals. Is what I'm hearing.
Yeah.
So yeah, I thought that was cool, but I was doing the boss for like a half hour, and I was like, is there a phase that I'm missing? Is there mechanics that I'm supposed to be doing? I'm so confused. I'm so lost. And then I realized it's literally just portals, and I'm like, all right, cool. Portals and AoE some stuff, and then chilling. I did do the second boss for the full hour though. That one was a little interesting. We didn't really understand the bomb mechanics. It was kind of hard for us to see which mechanic was doing what. So, for example, we didn't realize that there was 2 sets of circles, one for dropping the bomb and one for getting rid of it. So it took us like 15 minutes to figure out that you actually have 2 separate mechanics going on, and you need to actually clear out the bombs. Once that happened, it was pretty chill though. I really liked the kind of theory crafting that went behind which ad to kill, or if you could kill 2, if you maybe lust so that you can kill 2, or maybe even 3 if you split the raid up properly. That kind of thinking was really interesting to me. I always like fights that allow you to make decisions like that instead of just here's 7 minutes of mechanics. Deal with them in the order that they're given to you. I think
there's no way you actually do 3, right? That seems impossible.
3 probably not on Mythic, but I can see some heroic strats like maybe later in the tier for like speed clears where you actually
would maybe for heroic. I'm just the fact that they're on opposite ends of the continent makes it way harder.
Yeah, they're definitely far away. We quickly realized that we actually had to like pre-move as we were pushing them. And we also were talking about holding cooldowns for it specifically, but we realized if we're only doing 1, doesn't mattering. But I think 2 might be doable. Honestly, I don't know what the mythic tuning is. Obviously, we only tested them on heroic. There might be a mythic mechanic where it's like you can't do this, and then you're just screwed. But 2 felt pretty doable. I like 2. 2 seems fine.
2 is cash.
I do like the idea of being able to speed up kills once you have sufficient gear and experience with an encounter. I think that's something that has been sorely lacking in the last couple of raid tiers, with like some notable exceptions. But for the most part, like there were fights that actually like got straight up harder because you had more DPS. So yeah, hopefully that's something that will not see a return in the upcoming raid tier.
Would it even be a speed strat? Because all you're doing is just making less ads spawn.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Like I feel like you'd just be doing it for fun, which it does sound very fun, but when you kill,
it would look good on the meters, that's for sure, right? Unless
it's gonna be terrible.
Oh no, true, because it's less ads. Yeah, I don't
know. The one thing that I will say,
how it turns out, I guess.
One thing that I will say about that boss is that knockback ad fucks hard, dude. Like
that thing owns, dude.
That thing dies and it just sends you like halfway across the world. It's so crazy.
You always kill that one. You always kill that one. You never actually get that one to spawn.
We were playing around with killing the shield guy every single time, and then just going into one of the alcoves and letting it knock us back into an alcove.
Yeah, it seems like worse than just doing the opposite.
Yeah, I don't know. It was rough. It was just a bad time all around. The other two didn't really seem that impactful, though. I'm gonna be honest.
There's like the big dude. I think so. There's the shield dudes, which you can. We were doing 3 tanks, and we just had 1 tank like hold on to like 4 of them.
Yeah,
that felt decent, but it's like heroic, so who knows if there's like a mythic mechanic. You can also just like move the boss around a lot, where anytime they cast the shield, you just like move outside of it. There's like the casting ones that do a trillion damage. There's the big dudes that just do like tank damage, and then there's the knockback dude. I think I saw the knockback one twice because we just killed it every other time after seeing it once.
Yeah, we saw it basically every time because we elected to kill the big shield dude because we were just 2 tanking. But dealing with the knockback ended up being like one of the bigger pain points because you would just get knocked back into like, one person would be slightly off center, and if you're not tanking it directly in the alcove, they'd be like 2 steps to the right, and they'd be launched off into space, and then just like die to bombs. But yeah, honestly, I really like the fight. I really like that there's a choice there to be made. Especially some of the later overlaps where like now you have 2 shield guys, now you have 2 of the whatever the sentry dudes, now you have 2 knockback guys, and you're like, well, you can barely deal with 1 knockback guy. I guess we can't deal with 2.
I think it's cool that they're all, at least on heroic. Like I would hope that mythic is more consistent, but at least on heroic, it seemed like all of the robots were random, so you have to actually respond to what the raid is giving you, and you have to allocate resources properly.
I actually don't think that it was random because we were getting similar setups every single time. Like the second set, no, the third set of ads was always a double knockback for us. I think the locations
maybe
change.
Maybe I'm smoking crack. Who knows?
I think the locations might change, but it felt like the actual spawns of the ads were all the same. So you'd have the same set of ads, they were just in different positions.
That might be it.
Did you get to play all, or did you try all 3 specs when retesting, or did you just stick with the one that you're most comfortable with in order to be able to like soak in most of the mechanics of the bosses?
I was more focused on just trying to make sure, like I just wanted to see like how, because I know Subtlety's broken right now. It's the best spec in the game. It bonkers, does so much damage, infinite damage. Okay, I want to see how, like, we have a sub-rogue in our raid, so I want to see how like Outlaw was comparing to overpowered specs in sub-rogue. So I only played Outlaw.
I played a little bit of Assassination just to get a feel for the tier set and how that played on each of the fights, timing wise. With Duskwalkers especially, bringing it down to a minute cooldown. But I did play sub for actually probably about half of it. I actually went half and half. But yeah, I don't know.
Outside of the numbers, how did it feel
great
to play on like actual encounters? I mean, because like reading the bonuses, sitting on a dummy, personally, I feel that all 3 bonuses aren't particularly enjoyable to play because they disrupt your regular rotational gameplay a little bit too much. And I mean, especially on the specs that are already very reactive.
I thought the second one was good.
It can get a bit overwhelming, but yeah, I was wondering how it actually felt like on the bosses. You already said that the Duskwalker 1 minute cooldown reduction was pretty consistent.
Yeah,
even on fights with high mobility.
Yeah.
Is it something you foresee going to become the norm in the next patch, if the tuning stays somewhat the same?
I mean, if the tuning stays the same, then I think Duskwalkers definitely can see play. Being able to have, like, I don't know what the tuning will end up being on the ads for that second fight, on the second set of testing, but if you need to commit cooldowns in order to do 2 bosses, for example, like 2 of the ads, then I can see Duskwalkers being really strong. Because the times that you would push, for us at least, generally overlapped quite well. Where you would get Flagellation up and you get Vendetta up at the same time. So if you need to do cooldowns on that, that seemed pretty good. I also thought in general for the for the Sin tier, it actually felt pretty smooth to me, but I still think that the snapshotting at the end of it is weird. I know that a lot of people enjoy it, snapshotting it and seeing that as like a way to express your skill and your knowledge, sort of outside of the norm, where it's like, well, I have 2 extra seconds here. I'm gonna refresh my bleeds because I know how the mechanic works. But I'm still starkly against having a lot of snapshotting things like that. I just think they're unintuitive, and I'm not sure how many people actually enjoy snapshotting because of the gameplay versus how much people enjoy it because it does more damage and it gives them more energy. I think in general, though, the Sin tier with the energy increase was nice to play, but it just felt like it lasted way too long, in my opinion. Because especially with the snapshotting, you'd get like 30 seconds of exsanguinated bleeds or like 25 seconds of exsanguinated bleeds, and then Vendetta would be up again in like 30 seconds. You basically get like half the uptime. It's basically like playing Nyalotha, except that you'd be slow for like half the time. Which, is fine. It's a way that Sin plays. Sanguinate is a talent that allows you to do that, but the uptime just felt really high, which took away part of that exciting feeling of pressing Vendetta, because it felt like you were pressing Vendetta for the uptime more than you were pressing Vendetta for the burst, which I kind of don't like. But in general, I think it was good. I personally also enjoy the subset. I know that's going to get me some flack because, people hate the RNG on it. It feels very disingenuous to the spec, but I don't know. I enjoyed both of them. I didn't play Outlaw, so I don't know anything about that.
The Outlaw set has great potential. Okay, that's great potential. It just needs like 2 fixes, and it's so good, so close to perfection.
Yeah, once the 4 set actually does something meaningful, it'll be. I mean, even just the 2 set, it just it gets you into doing so many more finishers. It's nice.
Infinite combo points.
Yeah, it's very pleasing to just you hit Sinister Strike once, oh, you're full. It's like just having Mark for Death and you deal damage from Mark for Death. It's pretty great.
Yeah, it's sick. It just sucks. The 4 set stinks.
I guess the question would be is how will things change? I mean, eventually we'll see once they do something with the 4 set, but once they're done tuning and doing things, I'm hoping so. I'm hoping with this build we'll see that. I'm hoping I was going to get double legendaries and seeing what that'll do.
Okay, oh god. Oh
yeah, that should be if they add in the 2 because they did 3 chapters last week, I think, and then 2 chapters this week, or it was 3 chapters the first week, 2 chapters last week. So I think the 7th week is when we're supposed to get double legendary, I believe. So it should be this PTR build if they do it in cadence like that.
Umi supremacy, let's go.
Nope.
What legendary combos you think, or are you the most excited about for some of the specs? Like what are like the moment the patch hits and the double legendaries activate? What's the first thing you're gonna try out?
You do friggin' Obedience and Akari's if they put the friggin' Akari synergy in like they said they're gonna. It's gonna be so stupid.
Yeah, it's a lot of damage.
All right,
Subtlety is so overpowered. I hate that spec. They should nerf it.
I play all 3. I like it. I try to play all 3 pretty regularly. The only thing I need to work on I've already got like 2480 as Subtlety and Outlaw for keys. I want to do Assassination next just so I have them all at like 2500-ish. But now that Akari's, that was when I first saw that, when I first saw them announce the 2 2 legendaries, I was like, if this thing works with Akaris with the tier set, this would be so stupid. And apparently it's supposed to, so that's nice. And then me and Guy have talked about it in the past few weeks. We talked about Resounding Clarity and Deathly Shadows before they announced the tier set. So I don't know if that'll change into anything different, but I still think that would be pretty good, because that way you don't have to worry about any nonsense of Blunderbuss giving you 18,000 combo points. But Greenskins might still take the place of Deathly Shadows, I would think.
Yeah, the Deathly Shadows dream is officially dead. I'm officially putting it in the grave. Everybody,
just because of the tier set.
Everybody say goodbye. Well, considering that in the blue post they say that they're going to be fixing bugs about the gun legendaries, I am very confident that they are going to super juice those legendaries to make them the best.
That would make sense. I mean, the idea was to make a thematic play around.
Yeah. If you want to make a gun,
yeah,
you're making a gun set. You got to make the gun legendary broken. It's also they're almost good enough. They only need like a little bit of synergy, and the tier sets are probably going to give enough synergy to make them good enough.
Yeah, the synergy seems strong with guns and stuff. I think that the theme of the outlaw set is actually really, really good. I think for subtlety, like Sarah said, I think Akari feels strong. If it ends up working the way it does. Finality will just be kind of an auto pick for Mythic Plus, I feel. But we'll see if Akari actually manages to pull ahead in that situation as well. For Assassination, though, I'm really interested in Duskwalkers. I think Duskwalkers, obviously we'll see what that's like numbers-wise and stuff. But 1 Minute Vendetta just sounds Omega Pog with Obedience. Stacking that all together is crazy.
The ability to line up the cooldowns, I think that's always been one of the downsides of the flagellation in particular. When it comes to assassination, it's just always having to decide, okay, are you gonna sync the next set, or are you just gonna like send both of them on cooldown? And having overlapping CDs is just, it feels nice in your overall gameplay. And I mean, if the damage is there as well, then maybe it's not a perma pick for every encounter, but having a fairly solid 1 minute burst is certainly gonna open up a lot of opportunities to just really be one of the classes that provides a lot of single target damage on a low cooldown, which, to be fair, Assassination used to have, but not so much recently. So hopefully it really performs very well. I am still looking towards the Zoldyck Execute Dream a little bit as well. With the 4 set and the 2 set, there's certainly some room there for, like, if the boss design allows for it, to just bring the Assassination Rogue just to make sure that the boss actually dies once you hit the last 30%.
Oh, don't worry. Every important boss they'll not actually die. They'll just stop at 45% health.
Yeah, exactly. Right, like
every important
definitely
boss.
Been a sad tier for Zoldyck, I would say. And I mean, I've always been a big fan of it because while having the big overall is nice for self-worth and yeah, the status within the guild. When you're topping the meters, then everyone looks up to you. But it also feels nice to just look at phase damage. Like I still remember, I mean, playing Assassination on the Nafris, for example. Just looking at the damage in phase 3 specifically, and seeing the rogue at the top there, that felt nice as well. So I would certainly love for the double legendary to allow for more than just one combination of legendaries. That's just an auto pick because of the way the legendary interacts with the set bonus and the covenant abilities. And I mean, it kind of ties back into what Whispyr was talking about earlier with the trinket stuff, where certain trinkets having certain niches, and I would like that to return a little bit for the legendaries and the covenants as well. So hopefully there's encounter design that supports different types of, even something like Death Spike. Maybe there's an encounter where Death Spike might actually be good in a raid environment, because otherwise, I mean, Necro looks to be very much, in the grave. There's
they need to fix Death Spike. That like it's more acceptable for it to not work when nobody uses it, but everybody's about to be using that, and it doesn't work.
Yeah, just everything around Serrated Bone Spike and Death Spike needs to just be looked at. I know that they tried fixing the bugs, and then they made it worse, and then reverted it, and then kind of abandoned it again. But they definitely need to take a look at Necrolord bugs and just figure it out.
Do you think Necro is the only Covenant that struggles from that, or do you think that Night Fate to a certain extent has a similar issue with Toxic Onslaught and Sepsis just not being good enough in the current environment, or even the like in 9.2, looking forward to looking towards the new raid?
I mean, I think that Toxic Onslaught just has its own set of issues, not reducing the global cooldown and stuff, but then you go back and you see Celerity and you're like, okay, well, I understand why it doesn't. So there's a lot of interactions that like could happen where it's like the whole mechanic of giving other specs cooldowns that weren't designed for them is rough, because there's so many things that you didn't think about when you made Shadow Blades, for example. Like Shadow Blades on Outlaw, when you have Pistol Shot counting for it, and you have a tier set that does 1,000,000 pistol shots. So that kind of stuff is kind of weird in that regard. But I think the main problem with Night Fate is just that it doesn't have anything that's going for it. If you want a cooldown that's 1.5 minutes, you just go Venthyr. If you want to line up your cooldowns better and you get a 1-minute cooldown, you go Venthyr. If you go Mythic Plus, then our AoE isn't really that important anyways, so you would go Venthyr. If you care about the AoE, you wouldn't go Fae. There's just no real place for Fae to kind of stand out. And I think that Toxic Onslaught doesn't really do much to change that, because everything that Toxic Onslaught does is just done better by Venthyr. So in that regard, you just kind of will not see Fae unless they, give it some tuning and buff it to the skies, and it's just numerically better.
Yeah, I think that's just the case with all the Covenants. You make them do the most damage, people will play it. Night Fate doesn't do the most damage, it's not going to see play.
Yeah. It'd be like that.
It looks the coolest though with all the soul shapes.
I can't imagine a raid of
That
15
always makes me
Brutosaurs.
sad, honestly. To a certain extent, it actually always makes me sad. The fact that Night Fate is just not an option whatsoever right now for any of the rogue specs.
Yeah, it's a little stinky.
And therefore not being able to really have some fun with the soul shapes and everything. It always hurts a little bit deep inside myself. I would like to be a Brutosaur just running around and blocking people's vision.
Yeah. It's always fun during raid with the prism.
Oh,
yeah,
God.
for sure. being a full hippo raid right now.
Prison flashbacks.
No.
So that's kind of the list of stuff that we wanted to talk about, unless any of you guys have a big thing that we missed.
Not really.
An opinion that you have that you want to piss off half the Discord with?
I think I've said enough to piss off half the Discord, so.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure Guy already did that when he called Cymox the most fun encounter. I think.
I never said it was the most fun encounter. I just listen, okay? Portals
Omega fun encounter.
That boss has portals, so it owns. It's just that easy.
Portal copium.
Yep.
Listen,
So
if you guys want to be portal haters, that's on you. But I'm just speaking the gospel.
Yeah, sure. Gospel from an outlaw player.
Facts.
So let's do some community questions. We had a couple picked out. If there's any other ones that Ronkles or Oxy saw that they think that is good, no. The first one that we're going to go through is from Mr. Decaf. For each rogue spec, which talent rows are the least interesting? What type of meaningful choice do you think we should have in terms of talents, and how could some rows be supported, be reworked to support this? Now, obviously, this is a whole ass rabbit hole that we could go down for another hour and a half. So
just try to keep these a little shorter.
Yeah, try and keep it a little short. Don't go too in depth. I guess we can do a little bit of each spec. So whoever wants to take it away.
I think Outlaw has really good talents overall. There's a lot of variety. There's a lot of people that like to play bad talents, but still manage to do really well with it. So I think Outlaw's talent design is overall like basically a slam dunk. I think the only really bad rows are the Alacrity row and the Blade Rush row. I think Killing Spree should be a little bit better for the downside that is attached to it. I think Dreadblades needs another buff. I think Loaded Dice needs another buff.
Do you think Acrobatic Strike should just be baseline because it's just so much better? I don't recall ever playing Hit and Run or Retractable Hook.
It probably should, but I'm fine with it not being, because like if you've ever actually played with those other talents are insane. Like Retractable Hook with like Restless Blades, your hook has such a short cooldown. It's nuts. And then Hit and Run, it's great for transmog runs. But
I like Hit and Run on the original Zymox actually, because it made it a little bit easier to just stay in melee range for a little bit longer compared to just having longer arms.
Yeah. Like the thing is, there are some fights where Acrobatic Strikes does nothing, but the other options usually aren't good enough for me to care, because it's like a utility row.
The thing is Acrobatic Strikes is just, it's like the de facto choice. I run Retractable Hook like all the time in Torghast, honestly, because especially with Kyrian, and you have between Kyrian and the first steps or things, all the hook powers. You basically have Grappling Hook every other GCD when you have Kyrian, because you do Ringing Doom or whatever. So you have 20 combo point finishers, and it resets the cooldown of Echoing Reprimand, and it's insane. And then you're unkillable with Restless Sonic Geodes. But outside of regular content, it's just kind of a de facto choice. I mean, I would say the Alacrity row is not uninteresting. In its current state, it's uninteresting. It has the potential to be interesting if they actually did something with Loaded Dice, and Dreadblades might eventually one day be like a choice for more than just Venthyr, maybe. But yeah,
there's new buffs. Loaded Dice should always give +1 buffs, always, with any combination you get. It should just be +1.
I don't know. It gives, like, when you roll Loaded Dice, you get enhanced versions of your buffs. So it's like a better version, or it adds something to it. I don't know. Like, when you roll with Loaded Dice, you get, like, if you roll Grand Melee, it gives you a verse buff as well as whatever it normally, like, if they each give a stat buff or something, Yeah, I don't know. Loaded Dice is just unfortunate, because it could be something cool if they did anything with it.
Yeah. What about the Sin and the Subtlety gamers?
I mean, honestly, I feel like both Outlaw and Subtlety, for the most part, have interesting choices. They just happen to, like, some of the talents just happen to not be choices right now due to the way that the specs are designed. But something like Nightstalker, something like Dark Shadows, I mean, are interesting choices. You just don't really have a reason to pick them. Not in the current state of the game anyway. For me, basically, the only spec that really suffers from like badly designed talents, or talents just being too good compared to the alternatives, is just Assassination, because it's almost every single row there where you're like, yeah, this is a pick, and you're never going to pick something else for the rest of the expansion. And that just feels bad. I remember it was a similar thing back in Legion, where some of the rows you would just never ever change for like a year and a half. There was never a reason to do so. And I mean, one of the more obvious ones would obviously be Poison Bomb. I always have to cringe a little bit when I do Torghast with Crimson Tempest talented, and then as an epic power, I get to have Poison Bomb, and that's just not a very feel good moment.
Yeah, they should buff it back to Legion numbers. I think that'd be good.
It should be more consistent, though. I did not like the RNG aspect of it. I would like it to be tied to something that we have a little bit more control over. So
also,
like, yeah,
I just want to say about Subtlety. I don't think it's fair to say that their talents have a lot of diversity, because like Enveloping Shadow is just way too good with the rework. Other than that, I think there's like some decent stuff. I think the pre-med row, if pre-med like worked, it'd be like probably better, or like not like better than Weapon Master, but it'd be definitely better to like actually play with. But oh man, those pre-med bugs not fun. But yeah, Enveloping Shadow is like way too over centralizing because you need 2 stacks of dance for the spec to function at all, and Enveloping Shadow just gives you those 2 stacks. 2 stacks should just be baseline. Enveloping should give you CDR, and Dark should just give you damage.
Yeah, I do remember back in BFA, like Dark Shadows and even Night Stalker compared to Shadow Focus used to be a pick in certain plus dungeons just for the prior damage. And I think having that choice back where you either have higher dance uptime or have more meaningful dances, I think that was always a very interesting decision to make before every encounter based on exactly what the encounter demanded of you. And not having that choice right now simply because, as you said correctly, it's just the one extra charge on enveloping shadows is just you're never not
Too
gonna pick
good.
it because it's just so comfortable to play, and really you can't really play the spec without it in the first place.
Yeah, I kind of agree with all of that. I think the Alacrity row on Assassination has interesting choices, but Alacrity's strong. I think the last row on Assassination needs some help because Hidden Blade dog shit.
Crimson Tempest should be baseline.
Crimson
Not
Tempest should be
having an
baseline.
AoE finisher baseline is painful on
Um,
any of the specs. I always like to equate it to imagining a red paladin not having Divine Storm or
Yeah.
having to talent into it. It just
Or
feels
just like
wrong.
doesn't even need to be like paladin. Just like imagine if Black Powder was a talent,
Yeah.
like instead
Well,
of
there's a lot of
like
people.
enveloping.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of people, myself included, who don't necessarily like the idea of the 2-button rotation that sub has on AOE once you get to a certain target count.
Yeah.
And I mean, obviously, making Crimson Tempest baseline might easily lead to a similar situation. But yeah, I still feel that having a class where the entire core fantasy is about building combo points and then using them to unleash powerful finishers, and then you just don't have one for AoE, just feels very wrong and very limiting as well. Because at the end of the day, none of the rental powers will ever be able to affect a talent. They all have to affect core abilities, because I mean, you can't have a rental power that only works with a talent. I don't think there's really any in the game for any of the classes. So I think that alone should already hopefully get us a little bit closer to Assassination having a baseline AoE finisher.
Actually, a good segue right there to the next couple of questions. So we're going to take Frozen Soviet's question. What talents or borrowed power abilities should be baseline, and should anything be removed? We already talked about that a little bit with Assassination. I think me and Selly agree that Crimson Tempest should be baselined. I wouldn't be mad if Hidden Blades and Poison Bomb got removed, but that's pretty much everything that I got for that on Assassination. I think Subtlety is actually in a really good spot in terms of like button presses. I think that NATO is good. I think that Secret Technique is also a good button to hit. It's just way too weak right now. But I feel like in terms of stuff that should be removed, I don't really have that much to say. But baselined, I definitely think Crimson Tempest is up there for things that should be there.
I'd probably even add Blade Rush to it for Outlaw. I think having a second mobility choice, especially one that is as satisfying to press as Blade Rush, is a good choice. And it still ties into the same idea, right? You could even make it a finisher that just consumes combo points instead of just being a flat-out cooldown. And dealing a lot of damage and further, boosting your AoE damage output whenever you use it. I think all specs ultimately should have one AoE finisher baseline. And I mean, Blade Rush would fit in quite nicely there. And I mean, yeah, as for Subtlety, I think Enveloping Shadows should just be based on at least the one charge and Shadow Dance. Those are like such core mechanics. You can't really play the specs without them, or even if you attempted it, you really feel neutered going into a boss fight without those talents active.
I think just when we leave Shadowlands, so for the past 3 expansions, or like Legion and BFA, there's been the repeated community problem of why are we weaker going into the new expansion than we were before? Obviously, that kind of just like needs to happen, but losing abilities and stuff kind of sucks. I think moving into this next patch, they really need to look at the stuff that exists in the game for classes that makes them kind of work, and they need to just make them baseline. I think all Covenant ability, there needs to be one new talent row, and this new talent row is all of the Covenant abilities. It's going to be a 4-segment talent row, and it should just be the Covenant abilities. I think we've played with them a lot, and we've been swapping with them a lot, where we've treated them basically as talents. So I think they just have to be baseline. I just can't imagine a world of the 3rd expansion of a row introducing like this borrowed power system that people are a little reluctant to enjoy, and just taking it away again just seems like I don't know. I can't imagine them doing that again. Especially because like specs like Outlaw just like feel very good when you have stuff like Echoing Reprimand and Story to Bone Spike. Subtlety feels really good when it has Venthyr. Like the specs function with the stuff really well, I think. So I hope they keep at least some of them around.
Yeah, I mean, I can live with or without the Covenant abilities. I'm never a fan of losing things is the problem. I hate when every expansion we we invest 2 years into learning rotations around certain abilities, or even if it's just hit this when it's on cooldown or off cooldown kind of deal. I don't like it when anything's ever moved. Like when they did the pruning during Legion, I was like, this is just pointless. And then adding in things back just to say you added them back. Like now hunters, like BM hunters, have arcane shot for whatever reason, and you don't even use the move, or silly things like that shouldn't come back. But when it comes to baseline abilities, as far as for Covenant abilities, I could see them maybe doing a loose tie-in of them if we keep any sort of semblance of power from the Covenant, since this is like the whole creation of the universe is thanks to the Covenants ruling the realm of death, and however the hell the story works out like that. But as far as I think the specs can do fine without them, it's just there's a problem with losing things over and over, and I don't know if they'll actually let us keep even a fraction of these abilities. But I'm of the opinion that the rogue specs can play without them perfectly fine. Honestly, I mean, they're nice to hit, and I like having more buttons to hit. It makes them in rotations more interesting. But I don't know. The borrowed powers are always kind of an iffy topic, especially for me, because I don't really ever get too invested in them personally. I just don't, because I know they'll go away, so I never get excited about using them or not using them, because I know that they're just going to take them away, because they always do. It'd be nice if we kept them in some capacity, but I don't see it.
Okay, we don't have a lot of time. I have a few more questions. We should just kind of quickly bang out these last few.
Yes. Yep. All right. So let's keep it to like 2 sentences.
Yeah.
This one's a bit of a doozy, but how would you like to see Blizzard deal with borrowed power going forward? In recent years, it's been very impactful to the performance of each individual spec. I think they need to find a balance of borrowed power combined with class design, or just see borrowed power as a balancing nightmare and want it removed from your power.
I mean, I guess we kind of sort of covered it already. Yeah. I think having an expansion or even a patch cycle as a testing ground for new stuff, and then the thing that the community responds well to, could be considered to be rolled into the next expansion, as long as it doesn't just replace old stuff, but actually we do get a little bit of extra player power. Guy alluded to it earlier with like just feeling weaker going into a new expansion. I was never a big fan of that. So yeah, hopefully we don't just have like unused talents replaced with fun stuff now, because that still doesn't give us more things to play with. But yeah, I do like the general approach of using individual expansions or patch cycles as a way to try out things and just have a little bit of fun. And worst case, it just didn't work out, and you forget about it next patch.
I think borrowed power is sick. I like going into an expansion. Here's a bunch of crazy wacko stuff. It's going to be super overpowered. I thought corruptions, when you had the vendor, and by the end of the expansion, you were just juicing out the wazoo. That was sick. You had to avoid the corruptions. I like having a bunch of insanely powerful, wacky end of expansion stuff. So I'm fine with borrowed power. I generally don't care too much about losing power generally, but I definitely understand why people don't like it too much.
Mine, I basically was actually, ironically, mine ended up being basically what I said last time. I can live without them. I would rather see more time invested into fine tuning class like effects and how they play and rotational attributes of each class and spec, honestly. So kind of, I mean, I like them. I mean, borrow powers are kind of cool, but I could live without them. I would rather them spend time doing other stuff with each class and spec to make it feel like that class and not just like, oh, you're a rogue that shoots laser beams out of your eyes next expansion, because laser beams, I don't know.
I think something about borrow power is that it allows them to do stuff that obviously they can't keep around long term. Like, obviously you can't keep around corruptions long term, but corruptions are pretty fun, you know? Full GCD assassination rogue is pretty entertaining. So, but you can't do that without having the ability to say, we're done with these powers. Like, once the expansion's over, say goodbye. But that's just me.
Yeah, I'm with Guy on it. I think that it's interesting to have for a patch or two, but I don't think that anything long term that like would impact the spec too much should be added. I think covenants are like getting there on spec impact, but other things like corruptions or tier sets are definitely good things to have and break up the, I guess, monotony.
Right.
For our next question, kind of a two-parter. If you were a class developer at Blizzard and you were given the freedom to change just one thing about a rogue spec of your choosing, what would it be and why? And then the second part to that is if you have any unconventional ideas other than Smoke Bomb about raid utility for rogues that fit the class fantasy.
So for raid utility, I think honestly just like one of the like, so I hate Smoke Bomb, I hate Darkness, I hate all of these. I don't want any of them. They make me upset. I think just an easy one that you could either go back to the WAD thing with the what was it even called? Oh, it was a crit buff. Like, it was just a crit raid buff. You know what I'm talking about?
Honor Among Thieves.
No, that was crits give combo points. It's the one that just gave.
Yeah, but I think
everybody.
it kept the name or something.
No, it was Honor Among Thieves. Yeah, that was it. Yeah, every 2 seconds, a critical hit from someone in your party would give, but it was only.
No, he means the
I think
same as lead
either way. I think those are lame. I think I think just going back to Tricks giving a damage buff and then you just trade with other rogues, because rogue does a lot of damage. Just giving them a damage buff for having another rogue in the party. That's basically raid utility. It means 2 rogues get to be in every raid comp. I don't know. I feel like I like doing damage. I don't like having dumb broken utility spells that break fights. So I don't like utility that much. Damage is utility.
Yeah, I agree with that sentiment. I don't think rogue should have a damage. Should have raid utility. I mean, the class by itself, by design, is kind of like a lone wolf and doing its own thing and being like the solo damage dealer, so to say. Looking at other like RPGs, I always felt that rogue or thieves were designed with like being able to do things that no one else could do. And that made me think about another spell that we had in a past expansion, which was Symbiosis for druids. And honestly, I would like rogues to be able to just steal an ability from another player.
Oh, hell
yeah. Steal in the sense that they cannot use it anymore, but just that you can pick another player from another class and just get like one of their defensives with like a much higher cooldown or at a lower efficiency, and just have like be able to adapt to whatever situation you find yourself in, and then maybe you get a weaker ice block or something from a mage, or you steal like if a raid cooldown is good, maybe you steal like a very minor raid CD, or maybe you can yoink like a really good DPS cooldown or something like that, or just a single spell. We had that in the past with like Symbiosis and Dark Simulacrum from DKs, but I think it fits the rogue narrative pretty well to just be able to grab into our bag of tricks and pull something out that we shouldn't be able to use. Else. But yeah, because we yoinked it from someone else, we actually can do that.
Also, the name of the buff is Swift Blade's Cunning. It was a haste and multi-strike buff. by 5%.
Nice.
Ask.
Wow.
People, we were confused. Okay.
I guess for two-parter of question, obviously, if I was going to change anything about a rogue spec, it's uncap outlaw because that's just cheating. I mean, that's like the gimme. That's the gimme answer. But for raid utility, because I agree about the whole damage thing, and rogues already were greedy enough that we have amazing defensives for basically every situation. I would say just give us like an execute damage bonus. Like we apply a raid-wide execute damage buff. That's easy. You just hit a target, and when it hits below a certain percent, everybody does slightly more damage. You'd have to bring a rogue to basically every fight except Sylvanas, so
it would have to be very slight.
like 2%, whatever. Give it like 2%, done.
Yeah.
But yeah, I would just, if you want something easy, because the devs would, if I was a Blizzard dev, I would take the easy way out because that's what they do with everything. So, like 2% execute damage boost. Like once the boss is below 15% or whatever, so that way it's worse than like actual execute, like from a like Zoldyck or whatever. Give it like 15% or 20%. Give like a 2% raid wide damage boost.
All right. My idea.
If I could. Oh yeah. Go ahead.
Okay. So my idea was actually for more poisons. I feel like now that they brought poisons back for all the specs, being able to like poison tip like a hunter's arrows, or like teach a mage how to infuse their magic with poisons or some shit, where it's I don't know what the effect would be per se, but just having something where it's like now that the rogue's here, you can make everyone else learn this certain thing that does a little bit of ticking damage, or maybe once it reaches like 50 stacks or something, like you hit a target, it reaches like 50 stacks, and then it like explodes for a little bit of damage. Something like that could be cool. So that was just something that I had. I also had the idea that Selly had. Stole it, so I had to come up with something else.
I'm sorry, man. But clearly great minds think alike.
I think if I had to change one thing about a rogue spec, that's kind of a really, really hard question, but I think that I would look at the talents for each one. I would change something about the talents, like Crimson Tempest baseline and then bring in a new talent, or Acrobatic Strikes baseline, bring in a new talent, or something like that. We are coming up at the end of our time here, so to close it out, the final question is a bit of a silly one. What is the correct abbreviation of assassination? Is it Sin? Is it Asa?
It's Asa, obviously.
Okay, so you're wrong. Next.
I think the abbreviation of TRASH is the one that I prefer to go to. I think it's pronounced trash.
Okay.
Mine, this is a true story. For the longest time before I actually played Assassination on the regular, like prior to BFA, my Assassination gear loadout was always just called Ass Nation. So that was what I abbreviated it as, which is not much of an abbreviation, but it's slightly shorter.
Ass Nation.
I am Ass Nation. I'm a Puritan who will call it Sin until the day I die.
But yes, it is Sin. That's just, it's Sin.
Sin.
Or mute. Yeah, mute's another one.
No, mute is straight wrong.
Mute is not real.
Oh,
Anybody calling it mutilation, they gotta go, bro. They're stuck in classic. They are frozen in time. Okay, it's not mute.
They didn't even have Mutilate Classic though. What do you mean?
They had it in Wrath, I think, is when they got mutilated, isn't it? I can't remember.
Mute rogues are boomers.
Listen,
man.
okay.
Together with Hunger for Blood,
Anything older than Legion, it's too old for me. Okay, I'm a hip kid. Okay, I don't know any of these old expansions.
Mute is
I'm just a boomer. I can't tell you.
Mute is so boomer. Me. No one calls it mute. Stop saying mute. Mute is wrong.
Wad? Yeah, Wad's a boomer expec.
Anyways, I hope you guys all enjoyed our little conversation about stuff. We will be doing more of these. The turnout was good. If you have any more questions or topics or stuff, obviously feel free to reach out and give us some stuff to talk about. No plans on when we're doing the next one yet, but we'll be sure to put an announcement up. This entire podcast that we just did was streamed by Seli as well as myself, so the VODs will be up for those. We also will be posting it as a YouTube link, so keep an eye out for that if you weren't here for the whole thing, or if you want to share it with your friends, whatever you want to do. And yeah. Happy loot, happy vaults to all the NA people. You guys, stay mad.
Happy vault to Oxy.
Wait, I have one more thing to ask.
Sure.
So Mr. Red Rogue,
Yes.
hold on. So what do you think about the
Hi.
He is left.
Wow. Ought I to be offended?
He was removed for calling assassination trash.
Correct. Also, thank you, Zara, for coming to this podcast. If you don't know the Red Rogue, great YouTube channel. Check it out. A lot of Rogue content on there. And thanks for everyone for your questions. Thank you especially